December of last year, my friends and I stayed at this cabin up in the Rocky Mountains, and shit got real fucked real fast. My friend's co-worker told him about the place and said that years and years ago it was owned by some dude who lived in another state. I think it was another one of the Four Corner states, Utah or Arizona maybe. I guess this guy would rent the cabin out every so often for some extra income or something. The stories about this place were spooky, yeah, but being stupid and reckless, but above all curious, we decided it would be an awesome place to do some ghost hunting. The co-worker warned us against trying to open the locked door, saying that it was locked for a reason, and that it just felt bad, man. We assured him we wouldn't open it and would just do an Ouija board or EVP sesh or something. He seemed skeptical but agreed to tell us where it was. There were all sorts of stories about this cabin, with the tales of the locked door being the most popular, of course. Other stories spoke of sightings of humanoids, unidentified lights in the sky and in the surrounding woods, ghost encounters, shadows, phantom smells, people who had gone mysteriously missing in the area. Strange sounds like sonic booms were said to rock the little valley the cabin was built in, and apparently a fire nearly burnt it to the ground more than a decade ago, but heavy rain stopped the blaze, or so they say. Personally, the stories about what was in the guest book, burnt in the fire, intrigued me the most. See, back when the cabin was still being rented, which I think was sometime around the early 80s, there was this guest book that the owner left there, and like every other guest book, previous guests wrote random things in it. But what the guests who stayed at the cabin wrote was, worrying to say the least. Here are a few of my favorites. Heard someone stomping up and down stairs last night. Think it was coming from behind that damn door, but I couldn't get it open. I think someone's down there. Woke up to the smell of burnt bacon. Checked the fridge and all our food was gone. What the hell? Went on a hike for half the day. Came back, and the door that was supposed to be and stay locked was wide open. Ran outside to my car for a weapon, but when I got back the door was closed and locked again. Didn't hear or see anything else for the rest of the time I was there. Couldn't get the door open. That door is the gateway to hell itself. Creepy, yeah, but enough to deter us from exploring the place. Nah, besides, they were just stories, and I was the skeptic of the group. Frankly, I was just going to the cabin for shits and giggles, and I wasn't going to let a little folklore scare me or my friends away. I figured that the guy who owned the place was just a creep, and was probably just living in the basement, spying on his guests, maybe even kidnapping them. Which honestly is a lot freakier than anything paranormal if you ask me. Altogether there were 4 of us, Casey, Luca, Grace and me. We left Boulder sometime after 10 a.m. The cabin was near Rifle in the Root National Forest, so it was a little more than a 3-hour drive in good weather. Luckily it was unseasonably warm that day. The cabin was located far from any paved road, so I parked at the closest trailhead. We got out and hiked our way towards it using handwritten directions Luca's co-worker had given us, trying to make it there before the sun set. Near dusk, which was earlier than usual, being winter and all, we stumbled across a half-burnt, half-buried structure with a sunken-in roof. The front door was entirely missing, and the forest had grown up and around it into it. It must have been the place. We crept carefully through the doorframe and looked around with flashlights. It was obviously very creepy, run down and rotten and reclaimed by nature. It was half full of dirt and mud, leaving us crouching under what remained of the roof. Near one of the still-standing walls was a sunken door, only half of it showing. That's it? That's the door? It was Casey. He ambled forward and began pounding on it, yelling for whoever was inside to open up. Come on, man, don't. Dude, you're being an asshole. Yeah, please stop. What, you guys scared? Casey walked back towards the front door, then disappeared around the corner. After a moment he yelled, "There's nothing back here. The wall is totally straight. Must be a door to nothing." He pounded on the wall a few times before rejoining us back inside. Grace was glaring and Luca was looking at the ground. Not wanting this trip to be ruined, I said, "Hey Casey, I know what you can do, seeing as you're not scared at all." "Oh? What?" "Sit in the woods in the dark for 30 minutes. Surprisingly, he agreed. But on one condition, he got to bring a flashlight with him. Grace warned him that he should stay within our range of hearing, just in case, and with that, he set off into the darkened woods. Every so often he would yell, "Hey, can you guys still hear me?" And we'd yell back, "Yeah." Finally he yelled, Okay, I'm starting now. See you assholes in 30. Surrounded by silence now, we decided to turn out our flashlights and try out a few EVP questions, recording on 2 of our phones. We wanted to see if there was anything there. After only 3 questions, Grace, who had been peering around the edge of the doorframe and into the woods, spoke up. Guys? What? There's a guy out there. Case, it's not Casey, it looks like he's wearing a gas mask. What? Come here and look, she hissed. I crept over to her and peeked out. And lo, there was indeed a dude standing out a few yards into the forest. Moonlight glinted off his mask. He was wearing all black and was holding 2 gasoline canisters in gloved hands. Looked like he was looking right at us. He slowly stepped behind one of the trees and out of sight. What the fuck? I ducked away from the door and pulled Grace back into the darkness. Do you think he saw us? We should go. Casey, Luca said suddenly, we have to go get him. We can't leave him out there. What if that guy is some psycho killer? We silently agreed this was something we had to do, and after checking that the coast was clear, we ran for it. We were too afraid to call out to Casey or use bright lights, so we snuck around the forest, using red-tinted lights, each one of us following close to the other. And then we heard it. Casey, calling for us back at the cabin. Again, we ran for it. The first thing I saw when we got back to the cabin was that it was glowing. A 2 bright white light lit up the place, casting long, dark shadows. It throbbed like a heartbeat. The second thing I saw was that the half door that wouldn't budge earlier was wide open. The bright light was coming from inside it. Slowly, the light was dimming. The third thing I saw was Casey. He was standing just beyond the doorway, inside whatever lay beyond it, the back of his head facing us. It looked like he was looking down at something. Maybe he was looking towards the light. We called out to him, asked him how he got inside. Asked if he saw that guy, told him we needed to go, but he didn't move a muscle. It was like he didn't hear us at all. And then the light went out. Grace screamed and Luca yelled for Casey to stop. I clicked my flashlight on and aimed it at Casey. He had turned around, his head just visible above the mound of dirt and mud. And his eyes, I'll never forget. They were black, full black, like in those fucking horror movies. A grin cracked across his face. It looked evil, it looked ridiculous. Hey, dude, you can stop fucking with us now, I said, more courageous than I felt. Casey laughed. It didn't sound like him, it sounded demonic. And when he spoke, his mouth didn't move an inch. That smile was still plastered across his, sick and wide. The voice, his voice, sounded different, deeper, higher, horrific. Hey, guys, can you still hear me? I spun around, thinking there was another person with us, thinking that Casey was just fucking with us, but there wasn't, he wasn't. And when I turned back around, my light hit Casey full on. He was crawling out of the doorway in sporadic jerks, his limbs bent in ways they weren't supposed to. He was still laughing and speaking gibberish and grinning. We ran, straight ran. And as we ran blindly into the darkened forest, the light from our flashlights swinging wildly around us, I ran straight into something soft, warm, another human. It was that guy we had seen earlier. He was still wearing the gas mask, but the gasoline canisters were gone. Grace screamed again, but I leapt up and we bolted. The guy yelled something at us. I think it was wait. Grace heard hate and Luca heard 8-8. Behind us there was an inhuman roar and I glanced back. Casey was running faster than humanly possible straight at us. The guy in the mask yelled again. I think it was not this time, but the others heard, "That's my crime, it's the prime," respectively, before taking off and tackling Casey to the ground. I watched them struggle for a moment before I tripped and fell hard. Luca lifted me up, and together the 3 of us kept running and didn't stop until we reached the trailhead where my car was parked. Beside it was a dirty black SUV that wasn't there when we arrived. We leapt inside my car and, hands shaking, I started the engine. What about Casey? Luca pounded the dashboard and yelled, "Fuck him! Go, 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 go!" Behind me, Grace was laughing or sobbing or screaming or all 3. So I gunned it and didn't stop until we reached Rifle, where we finally calmed down enough to consider calling the police. We decided not to. Luca was absolutely convinced Casey was just fucking with us, that the other guy, the guy in the mask, was his friend and the SUV was his, that this was all just some elaborate setup. Me? I'm not so sure. Grace agrees with me. She thinks something paranormal happened that night. She thinks Casey was possessed, that the guy in the gas mask was the guy who owned the place, that he was doing some sort of occult magic. But the only thing I know for certain is that something strange happened that night. Something I can't explain. Casey wasn't fucking with us. The way he moved, what we heard and saw, it wasn't natural, wasn't normal. And honestly, since then I've been questioning my beliefs. A few days after that night, I got several calls and texts from Casey asking what happened, if we burned the cabin, why we left him. I texted Grace and Luca about it, and they said he'd reached out to them too. We all agreed to ignore him, and I ended up blocking him online and his number. Well, last night I got another call from a number I didn't know. It's what prompted me to write this out in the first place. It was Casey. He left a message, said he was all better, that some guy, an FBI agent or something, helped him defeat the darkness. Said he didn't remember what happened that night and that he wanted to talk about it. Just talk. Yeah, right. It was late November in Colorado, and I was around 7 or 8 years old. My father had the idea of taking our family for a weekend trip to a cabin he was going to rent. My mother thought it was a great opportunity for us to bond, so that's exactly what we did. We took Friday off from school to get a head start on our trip, which I didn't mind at all. Upon arriving at the cabin, we were greeted by the cold weather. It was almost December, so the chilly temperatures were expected. We settled in, sorted out our sleeping arrangements, had dinner, and planned our activities for the next day. Since we arrived quite late, our options for the first day were limited. During that night, however, I heard strange noises outside that resembled footsteps. I looked out the window but saw nothing, assuming it might have been an animal. I tried to go back to sleep, but about 15 minutes later I heard the footsteps again. I woke up my older sister, who was around 11 at the time, and she also heard the noises. We both went to the window and saw something outside that we couldn't identify. We decided it would be best to stay out of sight and went back to sleep. That night, sleep was difficult for both my sister and me due to the unusual events. When we eventually woke up, my mother was inside preparing breakfast and my father was outside. I asked my mum if I could go outside with my dad, and she agreed. My sister stayed inside and waited for breakfast to be ready. Outside, my father was engaged in conversation with a man named Patrick, a short and chubby individual with a shaved head who was wearing a veteran's cap. Patrick seemed nervous and was sweating profusely despite the freezing weather. My father introduced me and Patrick greeted me warmly. I asked if he was all right since he looked scared, and he attributed it to having experienced shell shock due to his veteran status. At that moment, everything appeared normal. My father and Patrick seemed to get along well, and I felt comfortable around him initially. Patrick explained that he had also rented a cabin nearby with his family and decided to introduce himself to our family. He was invited inside for breakfast, and everything seemed fine. After breakfast, my father and I went outside to play with Patrick. While playing, I fell and scraped my knee, prompting me to cry. My father was inside at the time, leaving me alone with Patrick. He offered to help by providing a band-aid and suggested we go to his cabin for it. I agreed, and we started walking to his cabin, which was quite a distance away. We talked about various things during the walk, and things took a turn for the weird. Patrick began asking about my shoe size and age, which felt uncomfortable. Upon reaching his cabin, I noticed that his family was nowhere in sight. I asked about them, but Patrick ignored my question and locked the door behind us. Feeling uneasy, I realized I wanted to leave. Patrick told me he had band-aids and asked me to sit down so he could put one on my scraped knee. As he attended to my knee, he made unsettling comments about my weight and muscles. This scared me, and I immediately stood up, expressing my desire to leave. Patrick insisted that I stay longer and have breakfast with him. I agreed reluctantly, feeling trapped. Inside his cabin, Patrick's behavior became increasingly strange. He asked about my weight and seemed pleased with my answer. His demeanor gave me the creeps, and I asked to leave. He refused and mentioned that things were just beginning and that I shouldn't miss out on the fun. At one point, a loud noise came from the bedroom, causing Patrick to become visibly angry. He yelled at someone inside the room and then assured me that it was just his sick wife. She appeared with a pallid complexion, looking distressed and sickly. She was sent back into the room after exchanging a brief look with me. Patrick then brought up the idea of trying on children's clothes that he had. This was the last straw for me, and I knew I had to escape the situation. I unlocked the door and quietly left, running towards my cabin. Reuniting with my father, I recounted my encounter with Patrick, and he immediately called the cabin rental owner. To our surprise, the cabin Patrick claimed to have rented hadn't actually been rented. We left the cabin that day, receiving a refund for the remaining day. The cabin rental owner contacted the police, who searched Patrick's cabin but found no trace of him or his wife. They never contacted us again. Looking back, Patrick was most likely a fake name, and his veteran status was questionable. I am left with unanswered questions about what happened to him and his wife, how he acquired a spouse, and why he was living in that cabin. It's a relief that the situation is behind us, but I will always wonder about the true identity and motives of the man we knew as Patrick. A trail I like backpacking in an isolated area of Pennsylvania was the setting for this odd encounter. The trail has a short section that goes over someone's cabin property and continues on the other side of his yard. It's marked with an orange blaze so you can see where to go. Usually it's an empty cabin. I always do some peering inside since it's in a pretty secluded spot, probably 4 or 5 miles from a major road. One time I was hiking through and there is a large dude grilling outside with about 15 Bud Light cans on the ground around him. I distinctly remember him saying, "Keep it moving, no food here," which I thought was funny since I didn't say anything about needing food. Fast forward to the following year, and I decide to take my sister, my wife, and her best friend on a trip that takes us through this very spot. As we are walking up on it, I see the dude is there again, which is odd since I've hiked the trail 100 times, and this is only twice I've seen him. He is grilling again, beer cans everywhere. I see him start to give the "keep it moving" signal until he sees who I am with. Now, the girls I am traveling with are attractive, so I'm nervous all of a sudden. He asks us to stay for dinner, says he has plenty of extra food. I tell him no, we are good, just trying to enjoy the trail away from the comforts of home. He gets weirdly pushy about us staying, and I firmly say no thanks, and we are just passing through. I hear the dude mumble to himself as we continue past his house. This is where things get weird. There is a prominent camping spot not far from this section of trail, and it's late. In my head, I want to keep going because I don't want to camp near this asshole. The consensus is everyone is pretty tired, so we set up camp. I'm nervous the whole time, thinking this drunk dude knows there are 3 women camping in tents near his cabin. I never get nervous around folk I see on the trail, because everyone is usually very nice and wonderful to talk to. This guy just felt off to me though. Fast forward to the middle of the night, and sure enough I hear someone on the trail outside the tent. I'm just praying it's a bear at this point. But I hear the dude mumbling to himself and I panic. I hear him now in the camp. He's going through our shit and is piss drunk. Fuck. Okay, think. I realize I have a blowhorn on my pack I use on the trail to scare animals off should I encounter any, so I unzip the tent slowly and roll out. Dude is fumbling around and it's scary as hell because it's the middle of the darkness in the middle of nowhere. I start to run towards him and blow my air horn repeatedly, and it's loud as shit. Everyone in their tent starts screaming. The dude nearly shits his pants and starts bumbling the fuck out of there. Everyone is so shooken up at this point, we pack up and night hike out of there. Worst experience I've ever had.